Welcome to the Conscious Dominance Podcast, where Andrew and Eric, two dominant men in dom-sub relationships, discuss how we approach our dominant roles from a conscious and loving place, and what we learn about ourselves through the deep intimacy that these power exchange dynamics make possible. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Andrew, hello.
Good afternoon, my friend.
Good afternoon. I had a subject for us to come at it with. And best way to frame it, I would say, is help. There are points where we need help. And often it is the capacity for me to realize that I actually need help and that I don't know what I'm doing that is actually the most helpful thing to be doing. And then go get the help. And that comes in many different forms. That can come in a book, that can come from a podcast, can come from a mentor, it can come from a coach, it can come from the Bible, it can come from any number of sources. It can come from our own study from the past. It can come from a friend. And for many men, when they go to get help, they often go to their woman first and foremost to get help. And if you're going to create a dynamic that has polarity, that has dominance and a surrender, the majority of time when you need help should not be to your woman. You should go and get the help somewhere else, work on it, come with solutions. Don't come with problems. Come with the result, not the process. And what I'm here to say to you, and that I know that you've said to me, that process is ongoing. I'm saying this to everybody who's listening. We're not finished products by any means. The capacity to continue to be able to lead in any endeavor is the capacity to continue to learn and to be humble and to be a student and to grow. And growth comes from stress plus rest, right? But I also think of it as growth, like we need to learn. You have to be humble and confident so that the humility, there's always these paradoxes or these polarities. So the rest and the stress or the humility and the confidence. And we have to have both of these things to move forward. But if we're coming at a situation and all we have is confidence, often there's delusional because there has to be a reality check. And often if we're not looking at the whole situation, often we have blinders on ourselves because we don't want to see the whole situation. Because if we see the whole situation, we will see things that we are not comfortable with, or we will see things where we have to learn about. So if you're actually doing this correctly, which is to have good situational awareness, you will always be confronted with things. And I am always confronted with things that I don't know, that I need to learn about, and I need to get support. And that can come on an emotional level, or it can come on an intellectual level, or it can come on a level of competency out in the world. And we've talked about all of those. But the one that has the most damage to me, in my experience, and if I do not address, is on the emotional level. If I don't address and really tend my emotions and the scale and really understanding when I'm really triggered or I'm trying to avoid situations because I'm going to get really angry or as we say, we're overly reactive, like G.S. Youngblood in his book. It's a great book out there about what it is to be a masculine, to lead in a masculine kind of way. He speaks about how you must respond and not react. And the core principle with that, many leadership books talk about this, is really addressing your emotions and addressing your triggers and addressing your capacity. And we talked much about this. Yeah. But one of the things that I would like to say to really state is that we will continue to find trigger things that will affect us or impact us. And when that happens, don't take it as an indictment on ourselves. I can't just be defeated that this is hopeless and there's something wrong and I fall flat and I can't do it anymore and I suck, and then just get defeated and Rachel, what's wrong with me? I suck and blah, 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 and make me feel better. And go down that rabbit hole of going to my woman because I feel defeated. So the key is when we get confronted with an impasse or something that impedes our capacity to stand there in confidence, we need to go and get help. And I know that this is something, this is the work you do. This is what you do. And one of the people that I came to get help from was you. That's how our friendship started, was I came to you
Yeah.
to get help. And I would love for you to speak about some of the situations where you've needed help or you've needed support and speak a little bit about this.
Yeah. Before I go there, I want to talk a little bit about, reflect a little bit on what you said, because it really is this isolated life that a lot of us live in the 21st century, where we find ourselves without support structures, without community. Without having in leaders to follow, without having a community of people who have already walked the path that we're on, leave us as men floundering. And that's how we end up in these situations where we feel like we're trash because we don't already know the answer to something that we would have no logical reason to understand. We have no experience with it, no background in it. So I look at this like approaching things with a beginner's mind. I love that phrase, the beginner's mind. Looking at anything, even something that you maybe have expert level awareness in it, to still be able to approach it, much less and including something that you're brand new to and that you have no knowledge in. Look at everything through the eyes of a beginner, because we can always learn. Just wanting to be able to go it your own way. Uh,
Definitely.
and so do I here when we're talking about getting support and getting help, is not discounting the fact that for us as men, there is a certain element to this that is always going to be doing it for yourself. So, who are not wanting to go get support in any of the ways that we're going to talk about here today. Think about it like this: gaining support, getting help from someone outside of yourself is helping to give you the information, the knowledge, the resources that you need so that you can then effectively go do this for yourself rather than having to try to put on an act or fake it till you make it.
It's a really good point, Andrew.
So, getting help is not admitting helplessness, and it's certainly not about taking a victim role in your life. The fact that you don't know something is okay. And if you do want to do something by yourself, if you do want to be the one who accomplished it, or in my case, a lot of my life, I didn't want to go get help because I felt like the people who I was getting help from couldn't actually help me because they didn't really know me. They didn't understand my life, what I'd been through, what I'd experienced. So gathering information from something other than just books and just podcasts. We're going to talk about books and podcasts, and information gathering as one of the ways that we can gain help and resources, but go to other people.
No, I think that's a really good point. I appreciate what you said about, I think, frame that you put out here is really important to acknowledge because I think it's really true. It is, we're wired. I know I'm wired to want to do it myself. And I want to do it alone. And I want to be competent. And I want to, if there's a problem, I want to solve the problem and I want to do it well. And I want Rachel to witness me solving that. Or I want anyone to witness me solving that problem by myself and be able to do that. Like you said, in order to do that effectively, especially at the beginning and beginner's mind, we need the help. And I think that's beautifully said. And I also feel like what you said about having not just books, but actual real people, because I think real people give you a couple things that books and these things can't, which is they can give you accountability and they can give you warmth. They can give you encouragement. It's not just somebody who's like, did you do it? Did you do it? But it's also somebody who's rooting you on. And again, another paradox, but I feel like especially at the beginning, we need both accountability and we need encouragement. We need both of them. And go ahead.
Other people can also give you nuance that you can't get out of a book.
Exact
A
exactly.
book is going to give you black and white. It's going to give you one way, one approach, which can be a reflection of, and if it's a good book, it's a reflection of someone's real life experience. Especially when we're talking about dominance and submission, there's a lot of nuance to these kinds of relationships. There's a lot of nuance to leading another human being in relationship in a power exchange. It's not just the way that it worked for someone else works the same for me because I'm not the same as them. Dawn is not the same as someone else. You're not the same. You and I aren't the same. The things that I do to lead Dawn will not work for you to lead Rachel because they're different people.
Right. Right.
So talking to people can help you understand the nuances. And when I say that, not just what they did, but why they did it, why it worked, what they learned, the problems they encountered, the mistakes they made, so that you can maybe not make all of the same mistakes, so that you can maybe understand on a deeper level what it is that this person gained.
I think that's a really important point. And another way of thinking about nuance that I think is important is timing. Because the book offers you the information, but it doesn't always tell you when to apply that information. And I feel like a lot of what we're doing with this kind of relationship is it's a lot more akin to an art or farming or something that's not like a machine. It's not plug and chug. It's alive.
Hmm.
And it necessitates a real discernment of what to do at the right time. So timing is everything and dosage is everything. And that's something you've really helped me with is to understand maybe it's this thing at this time and maybe it's this. And it's not always a lot full on right away. It's might be just a little tweak here. And it's, yeah, like you said, nuance is a great word to describe that.
Yeah, because if you want this to be more than a performance, if you want it to be more than just a role play or a game that you're playing with your partner, but you really want to integrate these power exchange dynamics into life, and you've got to work with the reality of life. And the reality of life is a lot of gray. It's not all black. It's not all white. There's not logical solutions to everything. And we have to be willing to play around in the messy middle a little bit and figure out our way in our specific situation as the men that we are with the woman that we're with. And if for some reason I ever found myself in a different relationship, which only happens if something were to happen to Dawn, but the things that worked that I learned here, the concepts would still apply with a different person, but the specifics would be completely different.
It's very true.
So back to your original question that you asked me, some of the ways that I've sought out help. Let's start with that information gathering, with the learning, the reading, the podcasts, because that's what people are probably doing listening to this podcast right now is information gathering for themselves, right? I listened going all the way back to really when I started my personal growth journey back in about 2014, 2015. That was when I was at my bottom, so to speak, as a man. And one of my clients that I work with in a one-on-one coaching capacity told me last week that I just assumed you came out of the womb this way. That you've just always been like this. You're just a natural. And I was like, oh, brother, you could have seen me 10 years ago. What a mess I was. Um, this all started with information gathering for me. And I gathered information from so many places. I read so many blog posts, so many books about understanding women and how women work, understanding men and how men work. Some of the stuff, relatively toxic stuff, even that I didn't always buy into but I certainly still learned a lot again from the nuance. You start going into some of these communities that talk about pickup artistry, seduction, the red pill, manosphere stuff. There's some really valuable information in there, and there's some really toxic stuff, and sometimes they're wrapped up together. But I think the most important thing that I learned from my, like, data gathering and from seeking support from that perspective was that I can learn something from anywhere, even if I completely disagree with the person that I'm learning it from. But to be intelligent enough to parse out the valuable pieces of information. I'll give you one example of that, and I'm curious if you have any examples of that for yourself. But one example of that is I came across the book called The Game by Neil
Oh, yeah.
Strauss
Yep.
probably 10 years ago. And I read that book and I gobbled it up. And this is as a married man living in a vanilla, like a super vanilla relationship who's at that point close to 100 pounds overweight and having sex with my wife once a month, most months, sometimes not. Like that was the state that we were in and that I was in, and just gobbled that book up. And then I started gobbling up more information on learned about women and how women work and function in a relationship.
Right. Like what?
Well, there's this call it the Disney prince or the romantic comedy guy that a lot of us were raised to assume that women wanted. The guy who basically bends at the knee for her, gives her what she wants, always focuses on pleasing her, is just the ultimate nice guy, and then she falls in love with him and falls passionately in love with him and wants to fuck him and wants to, like, give all of herself to him because of how good of a guy he was and how nice of a guy he was. That was the assumption that I had operated under, and starting to read some of that pickup artistry related material hit me really hard when I realized, "Oh, none of that was real. That was
Right.
all marketing."
Yep.
Did you ever fall into that nice guy trap?
Definitely. A lot. I think what's interesting is I was raised in a religion, and religion to me is training for being a nice guy, or at least the religion I was in. That's what the conditioning is, and is the training is to that is the end result. I remember being with a girl who in college that said, "I love you spiritually, but I love him physically."
Oh,
And
fuck. Oh, what a, like, dagger. Damn.
dagger. And I remember at the time being like, "I don't want your spirit." I'm like, what is that? It's like I wanted it to be physical. But I had always prioritized the spiritual. I'd always prioritized the religion, which I look back and I have come back. What's interesting is I've come back to where I've brought the two together. So I brought the physical and the spiritual together, but I had to leave behind religion and spirituality and all that kind of stuff, come through a whole journey to be able to bring it back together in a new kind of way. So yeah, when you say, have I fallen into the night? No, I mean, for me, the problem was I had a nice guy here who I had to present to the world and thought that was good boy, Eric. And then bad boy, Eric went off, had his own fun, but he was doing that at the expense of his relationships and his life and lying out of integrity and had a whole secret little thing going on. And that had many different lives would go out and then come back. And it was just a sort of ongoing thing. And it really had created these two worlds. And it wasn't until I brought them together and really realized that bad boy actually was a lot more of who I was. And the good is actually, it was a performance. And how do you do the bad or the quote unquote the bad, which is not actually bad, but how do you bring that, make that sustainable and create an order around that? Actually, what's interesting is the books that have really helped me to bring into relationship. Yes, some of those pickup artist books and those thoughts, but a lot of it's actually business books, which I find to be, it's interesting.
Mm.
I've taken business books and have applied them to relationships. Let me give you some examples. From Good to Great. So that's
That
a
was my
book
first going
that's,
to be my first example of a business book. Yep.
yeah. And that book really, I was like, oh my God. So you're taking these businesses that were good and how did you make them into great? One of the first things is this model and this idea, and I've talked about this before, but it's worth reiterating, this level 5 leader. And so what they found are they had certain characteristics that were in all of these businesses that went from good to great. And they define it as it was this for over many years that there were certain stock returns, they made a certain amount of money, lasted for a while. So they were thought of as great. And one of the ways it was great was that it was a level 5 leader. And level 5 leader was somebody who wasn't just an asshole tyrant, my way or the highway. And like a Leon Coca kind of like just somebody who was a old school, masculine, sort of dumb, but it was saying, okay, I'm going to have those qualities of high and tight and order and leadership, but we're in service of the business. And there's humility that's a part of that. You're not as big a sports fan as I am, but there's a basketball team that's really associated with this sort of level 5 quality, which is the Spurs and Tim Duncan. He's a great example. And there's another book about sports leaders, sports dynasties that have been successful across many different sports. And in this book, they talk about what is the common characteristic of all of them. And it says it is team captain. And that the team captain, when you look at the characteristics of a really good team captain, they hold a lot of the same characteristics of the level 5 leader. And it really helped me to really get a better sense of what would be conscious dominance and how to bring that quality into a relationship. And then also in business, like in a relationship, there needs a leader. There needs somebody who's where the buck stops. There needs a vision. There needs a mission. There needs order. There needs structure. There needs you need to run the whole with a bit of the same mindset that run a business actually makes for a much better home. And it's not in the same way that a business can be no fun to go to work at, or it can be a really great place to go to work at. Same with the home. And I think a lot of times men approach their home life like bluff, like they don't really approach it. There's no intentionality. There needs to be somebody, or there needs to be a vision that's leading you and moving you forward. And then when there's a situation that's awry, you need to have somebody who's taking responsibility for it. And that's what these books have applied for me. And there are other books as well, like Conscious Leadership. It's another great one that brings that up. So anyway, it was chaotic. Is the story of D Hawk and the founding of Visa. That had a big impact on me. And using chaos theory to apply to Visa and how you organize businesses.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Exactly. Another great one.
Yep.
Exactly.
Begin with the end in mind. That's
Exactly.
a really important concept in leading in relationship. The Success Principles by Jack Canfield is probably one of the most impactful books I've read in my life, because it is not just about it. It's about a whole life approach to success that includes everything from responsibility, finances, business, relationship, spirituality. That one's been a really impactful one too.
Yeah, exactly. And then I also have really found in just old school BDSM, like this book right here, it's a one that's older, but it's called The Loving Dominant.
Yep.
And some of these books like this that come straight from the world of BDSM, those have been very helpful. I enjoy those as well. I came at this directly from where it was a sexual thing, where that's where I was most aroused and most had my life being dominant and submission. And so I had to bring that into the regular life. That's where I brought the business and kind of combined it and merged it with some of these BDSM books, and then brought in books that are, like you said, that mention that don't seem like they're part of it. But The War of Art, for example, books that are about creativity and then about art, those books have been also really helpful because that I find that this whole experience is creative. And so I have found being someone who's an artist, I see the whole project as an art project. So I
Let
would say
let's not
three kind of,
I don't wanna bury that. The War of Art is fantastic. It's so damn good. And if you are listening to this and you haven't read that book, especially if you're more of a logical minded guy and you want to try to look at life through a little bit more of a nuanced lens, that's a great place to start, along with the Four Agreements. Those two
yeah,
books start.
exactly. Four Agreements is another one I returned to. I was realizing I do pretty well with three of them and I suck at one of the four agreements. I still make assumptions.
Mm,
I still make assumptions around, oh, that person's thinking this, or my kid's thinking this or that. And I find myself making assumptions. It's a great one to return to. Tom Brady said that was one of his most important books that's had a big
mm,
impact on him.
interesting.
Yeah. So Four Agreements, I agree with you. It's interesting. We have a lot of the connection with those. And then I would say you probably too, there's like David Data's book, The Way of the Superior Man. And some of that goes way back, but some of these books that are more in the polarity realm, I mentioned G.S. Youngblood. He's also somebody that's really been a big impact on me.
Yeah.
So
So I'd like to hear from you then, reading these books, gathering this information, how do you, back on this topic of support, how do you integrate those things into your life? Because reading the book is really just downloading or inputting some data. How do you go about learning from them and actually applying what you learn?
I write and the writing helps me to make it my own because I write for myself and I have a practice writing 750 words pretty much every day. I've been doing this for a while. It's like a free form writing, but I often will take whatever I'm reading and mash it with whatever's going on in my relationship. And because I do this, what we're doing professionally, I'm always trying to bring and test the ideas and see how they kind of work. And I test them in real life. And so I do a writing exercise. I also do a brainstorming exercise that I do. And then I also make up lists in a more logical kind of place to test it out and see. One of the things that I do is I take something that's an idea that's used in, say, in business or in art, and then say, how can I test this over here and see how this works? So, how does this apply in the relationship? And it's crazy the parallel. Like, if it's a principle, it works. If it's a principle in business, which is relationships, principle in sports, which is also many things is relationships about an objective
Mm.
or polarity or even creativity and art, all of those things coming together. And I think especially the relationship dynamic that you and I have, one of the great things about it is one of the more challenging things is it's up to us. So that's why, again, going to help and getting support, it's not something that there isn't really a lot of books or writing that's specifically about what we're trying to do. So it's almost like I've needed to take these different streams and bring them together to be a new stream,
Yeah.
a new track.
Outside of books, I think I'd maybe lump together with books, and I don't really think we need to get too in the weeds on any more of the specifics, but there are great podcasts. There are great there's not a lot of people who still write blogs anymore, but a lot of the really powerful, like, really good writing in blogs from the last 10 to 15 years is still out there, and it's some of the most impactful content you'll ever find. People who used to or maybe still do some write blogs for as a business.
Yep. I Mark Manson, he's
Yes.
somebody that writes blogs and writes books and the subtle art of not giving a fuck guy. Those are really impactful as well. And Another person I want to shout out to is Ryan Holiday
Mhm.
and all of his work on stoicism. So those books have been really helpful too. I left that out, but I think that's a big influence on me as well. So
Side note on Ryan Holiday. I I do not know this for sure, but I'm relatively certain that he played a part. He was maybe in the marketing for or the subject of this book from probably 15 years ago called I Hope There's Beer in Hell by a guy named Tucker Max.
yes, they were affiliated.
They were affiliated. Okay. That book was another one that, like, boy, you don't want to incorporate that as life lessons, but it really did teach you something about the nature of how women and men interact if those stories were true, which he claimed they were. Anyway, a lot of these guys too, Ryan Holiday, Neil Strauss, who was in the pickup artist game,
Yep.
um, a guy named Julian LeBlanc, who used to run a company called Real Social Dynamics, who now does seminars he goes by Julian himself. Um, there are a lot of people out there providing really good information, providing a lot of value for people who want to learn this stuff when it comes to a deeper integrated self and to you can apply those lessons to however it is that you are wanting to live your life. So I think
Mhm.
that's a really valuable place to start with looking for support and looking for help and being willing to learn something new.
Truth.
And I think that's one of
Truth.
the easy places, honestly, for guys to go for help because it doesn't involve interacting with anyone else.
It's true. No, I agree. And I think there's that point though when we need help from a real person. And I think the real first gateway for that for me was, and that was
Al-Anon,
actually
right?
kind of Al-Anon, yeah. So Al-Anon was more of my experience than AA, but that was the first place that I really went to and was able to be vulnerable and seek its support and be around other people. And I found it to be helpful for a while. But then it got to a place where I needed more specific, like I needed somebody to be there just for me. And I needed to be able to dive. And that actually then led to therapy. And that actually was, so it's all and on and then therapy.
I'd love to hear your kind of evolution with therapy, and I'm happy to share mine too. The AA thing and the 12-step program thing is an interesting one, though, because as I was starting to get into this work of teaching men, at a certain point, I was teaching this group of guys, and they said it would be really helpful to have some kind of a process to follow, like some sort of a step by step. And one of the guy goes, "Yeah, like a 12-step program, but for becoming a dominant man." And something clicked in my brain, and that was the first course that I built in my business is becoming a dominant man, which is based on a 12-step process that I developed for men to kind of come into this integration of dominance. And it's really built a beautiful community of guys who are doing this work on their own, but also come together every week and have kind of that camaraderie of other people who are on their own journey of trying to unwind their old patterns of the ways that they've approached dominance, the ways that they've approached women and relationships. So the like that kind of a process and integrated with community is really powerful. And I think that's why AA has stood the test of time and why other 12-step programs that are built off of that same model, like I did with my own, was uh, just a really powerful means of instituting change because it really
Right.
is a commitment to a lifetime of changed behavior.
It's true. We need to see examples of people that have turned their life around. For me, another person that was an example, I appreciate his transformation. And that is a podcaster named Rich Roll, who was an alcoholic and then literally in his 40s completely changed his life around, got into endurance athlete,
Hmm.
and then started this podcast and became this. So it was a night and day sort of transformation. And that's something I feel like a lot of my life is a before picture of before and after. And you need examples. We need examples. We need these examples of people that are able to make radical transformation in their life. And we need men. And I think one of the most important things that I found is going to other men for support. It's one thing to go to women, but I found going to other men to be especially important for my journey. And it's not only you, but also I've had a therapist who's been really helpful for me that's been a man, and also other men as well, friends, but also people that will hold me accountable, people that will look at me and say, hey, that sort of thing is not acceptable right here. And there's something, especially with men, with other men, that's able to both be really compassionate in a way that another woman can't quite be quite as compassionate, and also hold us accountable in a way that a woman, I don't know, but from my experience, that's what I've found.
Yeah, I can take firmness from men differently than I take it from women too. Like,
Yeah,
a
that's true.
and that requires that the person receiving it is open to it and to it. I think I've told the story in here before about a guy who was my best friend for 20 years. I was the best man in his wedding. He was the best man in my wedding. And there was an incident where he had too much to drink and almost fell off of my front porch with his baby. And his wife was crying to me that about his drinking problem, and I confronted him on it. And that was the last time I heard from him.
Mhm.
He wasn't open to it, but
Right.
I still had to say what I said, and then given the opportunity, I would say it again. But you're right about other men and that we can really take it's a different thing having another guy see you in your bullshit and call you out on it.
I have to say, I've been the guy with the baby and I've been you
Okay, you've been on both sides of
in my
that?
past. And metaphorically, I've never been a guy, actually, maybe that's true, but I have been called out and never talked to the guy that called me out again.
Hmm,
And I'm in this moment reflecting on that. And then I've also been someone who's called someone out and then never talked to me again. And I've also been someone who's called someone out and then we continued a relationship and that becomes vice versa. And that's a powerful place to be in where you're able to go back and forth in that kind of relationship.
yeah.
And
Well,
yeah,
so you mentioned therapy, and for me, I avoided therapy for a long time. I thought that the things that I had gone through, that I had them under control and I had them figured out, and I didn't need that kind of help because in my mind, this was my lack of humility, which is really coming out of the same place that had me needing therapy in the first place. But in my mind, I was smarter than all the therapists anyway. So how are they going to offer me any
right.
help? How am I going to go to someone who doesn't understand life the way that I understand life, who doesn't have the same intelligence as me, and have them be able to help me with a problem that I don't even really feel like is that big of a problem? I ended up having a conversation with somebody who I had never met, changed his life. And I had been struggling more with some of the childhood sexual abuse that I went through than I ever had in my life at this point thing with this guy just happening to share this with me. Also because of COVID, who did EMDR therapy and facilitated it for him at openings in their schedule who's in years. So I was able to get in more infinite devotion stuff. Is only that I would not be this man if it had not been for going through that process. Period. It is the fundamental thing that kicked me in the ass in just the way that I needed to be kicked and showed me that I can actually, first of all, showed me that how much the trauma from my past was impacting my current reality, but then also that those traumatic experiences could be healed when we really want to, not just avoided and not just tucked in a corner like I had done my whole life, but actually brought back out of the closet, laid out bare, looked at, and then let go of so they didn't have to be affecting me constantly. And if there's one thing that I could get every man to do, it would be to find an EMDR therapist and go do it even if you don't think you need it. Because I promise you will come out of it better.
Because of your encouragement, I did it. I did therapy. Therapy was helpful. I don't get me wrong. I think therapy was a very important first step.
You're talking talk therapy at first?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was an important step. But I think EMDR therapy helped me realize that I had issues
Okay.
and they were me. And I had to take responsibility for those and to and help me unwind myself out of a previous relationship, and to be a place to help me do self care and help me to be a place of compassion for myself and help me through my anger issues. It helped me to just get to a place where I can even get to start EMDR. I
Okay.
feel like it helped me to get to the starting line. I feel like EMDR, truth is, I'm still in the process. It's something that I'm literally in the middle of going waves. I'll do it for a while and take a little break and come back at it. And I don't know, anybody out there has had any experiences with any sort of psychedelic or any type of other healing modalities kind of put you in an altered state. In many ways, EMDR has that capacity, or something like breath works. There's another book and a whole field of study that's been really helpful for me in my own work, and that is trauma. Russ also, I forget his first name, but Vanderkirk's The Body Keeps a Score.
Bessel van der Kolk.
That's
Yep.
it. The Body Keeps a Score. And Gabor Mate's work on trauma.
Yeah.
That
The Myth of
I
Normal
know,
is the book there. The Myth of Normal
yeah,
by Gabor Mate.
we both have, you and me both have an experience in our past with some pretty traumatic events. And I can realize the impact that had on my life. And that every time there was a pattern that would occur. And when I started and I took some time and I like reflecting back on my life, and I was realizing and I was looking at my life and the same patterns keep repeating. And no matter how much I'm aware of that pattern, there's a great line in the AA community: knowledge avails you nothing. Like, it's awareness avails nothing. Like, who cares that therapy, you know what's wrong with you and all this kind of stuff. Like, I would see these patterns come up again and again. It would always be in the situation. There it is. But I didn't know the degree to which it was my body's response to trauma that was actually an appropriate response when I was a youngster. When I was that age, that was the appropriate response, was to shut down. It was appropriate for me to have a response that was fight, that was freeze, that was flight. So those responses in my nervous system were the appropriate response at the time. The problem was, it's not so much that we have trauma because of what took place, but as Gabor Mate said, it's because no one was there for us right afterwards. There was nothing for our body to co-regulate with.
Yep.
As human beings, we are masters at going through trauma and then getting better by being with another body that knows how to co-regulate. So if our parents did not have the capacity to co-regulate with us, then our bodies have in them, we haven't learned how to co-regulate that. And so one of the most learning helpful things for me has been able to co-regulate with myself. So how do I take something that's traumatic and then take my nervous system and help with this? And this somebody else was massively helpful that I haven't even mentioned. And it's an interesting person to highlight, but it's actually Rachel. But it's not because of she being my girlfriend, but because of the work that she does. She's got a great body of work that's called the Mud Room. It deals with this emotional ladder, deals with being in the red, then moving into the yellow, and then moving it all the way up through the green and then up to the blue. It's like the conscious leadership above the line and below the line. A lot of the work comes from Abraham Hicks and conscious leadership work, but it's a real whole program I have been able to utilize for myself that says any trigger, it can be, I don't have to have external situation to be different for me to be okay in my body.
Yeah.
And her work there has massively helpful for myself to do that kind of work. What I found is that combined with EMDR, which many ways, what EMDR does is re-triggers the thing, but then teaches your nervous system in your body to find that safe space and to co-regulate. So it was almost like the culmination of the mudroom with EMDR, where I was able to do some massive healing in I would say this last year, where I was able to take some traumatic events in my life and a long standing, I know I'm still in the middle of it because I start talking about it and I start getting like you can start feeling that I have some stuff with friends with bullying and sexual abuse. And that kind of situation to have that and be in my life does a number on me. And I didn't realize the degree to which that number did. And a lot led to a lot of my sexual urges that were what I would call that were outside of the norm. And as I healed myself, what's really interesting, I was always worried if I go heal myself, will I stop having those kinky urges?
I had the
And
same
what I
exact
find
thing
is
when I went through EMDR. I asked my therapist that same
no,
thing, like, "Am I gonna lose all my
that's the
kinky
opposite. I
side?"
want to tell you what's so cool is that you still have those kinky urges, but they don't run the show.
Mhm.
They're not like I'm not addicted to them. I used to be addicted. If I didn't get that hit, it was like an addiction.
Yeah.
And no longer am I addicted to it. And I feel like I couldn't really be a conscious, dominant person with Rachel and really own myself and own my urges and be in control until I did the healing work. And until I was able to do that, because otherwise these wounds, they become something that's always needing its fix and needs that. And I feel like when we see that addiction, this is a lot of Gabor Mate's work, is because there is some unmet need that we have on an emotional level from when we were a child, or we're not able to be held or loved or supported, or we didn't have adults in our life who are there protecting us or keeping us from situations that were really traumatic. Then that comes into my own body where I no longer am keeping myself. And I feel like I have to make that world out there better and improve it. Otherwise, I'm going to get hurt. And
Yep.
so I had this terrible temper and I would freeze and I would have these panic attacks. And it was all due from those situations. And I had to go back and re traumatize myself, go through these experiences. And it wasn't so much that I needed Rachel to be there. At first that happened, but eventually I had to learn how to do it myself. And I told her, I was like, I don't want you helping me anymore. I don't mind taking your work and the things that you've taught and learning from them, but no longer when these situations that I'm going through, it's been about a year or so that it's on me. It's me with me. And that until I started doing that and really doing it myself, I don't think we were in a conscious dom relationship. And that was one of the biggest realizations that actually came to you was like, you were like, you can't just keep coming to her with all your shit. Otherwise, that dynamic, if you she can't be the person that's there supporting you through your trauma. And this is one of the big situations that I've been navigating.
Yeah. And hearing you share all of that, I think some guys out there have probably heard and maybe had directed at them that they're acting wounded little boy energy or
Right.
and this is the kind of language it isn't particularly helpful on the part of somebody who maybe has some understanding of these of this trauma work that we need to go through as people and who see then other people acting out of their traumas. But then when you start using that to hurl insults at people, you actually aren't being helpful to that person at all.
Mhm.
And but then Jordan Peterson says it this way: at a certain point, we have to update our memories and we have to update our responses. We have to come at these things with a more mature approach. And this is why
It's
I
like an
love,
operating system.
yep, this is why I love the holistic psychologist on Instagram, on YouTube. Her name is Nicole LaPera. She has a whole set of books, workbooks, a lot of free stuff on YouTube, podcasts. But her phrase that you are your own best healer is one that always hit me and struck me really hard because no one knows you like you know you, and you are going to have to be the one to work on yourself. And I think that's what we're getting at here. If we want to heal those wounds, we want to heal those things from our past, and we want to be a better, even you have to do it yourself. You have to want it for yourself more than anyone else wants it for you, and then be willing to use the expertise and knowledge of other people who have been there before to show you the way. And that's the really key thing for any man hearing this who's maybe afraid of getting help is it's just a guide. Like that person is almost like the map to show you the way so you can navigate it for yourself.
I mentioned this before. I love what you just said. I want to give shout out, I think, both to Jordan Peterson and Nicole Pair. Those I didn't mention them earlier, massively, both of them in my journey, right when I was starting therapy. Jordan, really, I mentioned him before, but he was massively important for me. And so was her. So that combination, they're a good 1-2 punch, actually. But I love what you're saying about this too, because I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. I have an uncle who who committed suicide right around the age that I went through he was the person I was closest to when I was young. And then right then I started getting bullied, and then I started being abused sexually by other boys in a
Mhm.
way that was really awful. And then I had some other family stuff. But him, the thing I bring him up was he didn't get help. He didn't have help. He got into a lot of big issues with drinking and drugs in a way that just took him to some really dark places. This is way before the internet. I was 12 when he committed suicide. So I'm very passionate about it because I see that, and I know for myself too, I've dealt with having my own issues with suicide and desiring that, thinking that's an option. When you have family that does that, it becomes something where you're like, oh, that's an option. I can do that. And so I've been very strong in this realm with working on myself and coming to that, battling with these demons and these things. And I love what you said about this because it's when you need the help, this is doing the work. This is doing it on your own. Like the irony is that we think like we're going to get help and we're weak. No, the irony is like this is what it means to do the work. You're in new places that you've never been before. And to get that new operating system, obviously, whatever operating system got you here can't get you there. You got to upgrade. And if you think with all in your head, that's the problem. And there's this massive need of humility in order to move that forward. And a lot of times that I feel like one of the greatest teachers that I cannot tell men enough is actually pain. We have to not be afraid of pain. Pain and suffering and leading into that, take away the things that keep us from feeling the pain. That's why quit the things, quit them all and just suffer and be and feel your pain, but feel it without falling apart, feel it without feeling sorry for yourself, and just own it as grit, as a station and grit and an endurance. And, you know, like Goggins, he's another one, right? Stay hard, stay through the pain, stay through and feel that. You're different on the other side. You are different on the other side. And the most painful things that I've had to deal with actually aren't physical. They're actually going through the EMDR, going through the emotional pain and re-feeling what I went through as a kid
Yep.
and re-feeling those moments and really feeling that and sitting with myself. Because essentially what happens with the EMDR is you re-feel, you re-go there and your body has an opportunity to have a new reaction to an old event. And in so doing, your body changes. The body, that score that the body keeps the score, it's a new score. It's a new score, baby. You don't have to have the same old score.
Yep.
And so you literally feel free. You feel lighter. You feel different. You're not ruled by the same things. And then all of a sudden, that thing that used to trigger you or used to upset you or you couldn't be around doesn't bother you anymore.
Yeah. And I think for the people who have been watching this podcast since the beginning, they've seen you in this evolution. And what EMDR does for a person and how it helps to ground them. Because even over the 20 some episodes that we've done of this podcast so far, the level of groundedness in your energy compared to from the beginning to now, I guarantee has at least in part to do with having been going through and doing this work over the last 6 months. So, for like walking, living example of what this does for a person, just in seeing and hearing and feeling you in the way that you show up here. And we haven't even hit on half of the stuff that we have to talk about around getting help. So let's come back in our next episode and do a part 2 on this, because I've got some other really interesting things to talk about getting help around sexual education, and I'm a lot more to talk about here. So, want to do a part 2?
This is great, Andrew. Thank you. I really, when we were going, I kept looking at the time. We normally stop. We were like, we started to stop. We were like, we're going to stop at 45, but it was too good to stop
Yeah.
and I love it because I too have a lot more to go with. So we'll come back next time and we're going to do this rock and roll.
All right.
So thank
We'll,
you,
s-
Andrew.
we'll